Hey guys, welcome to episode 4 of Understanding with me, Jonty. I want to talk today about Palestine. Now, actually, more specifically, the Palestinian Israeli conflict. And this is a difficult topic because there are a lot of strong opinions on this issue, right? There's the strong opinion, very pro Israeli opinion, there's the very pro Palestinian opinion, and there's a very strong opinion of like, leave me out of this. I don't drag me into this. I want nothing to do with it. But generally, you know, everybody's kind of trying to figure out what side you're on. So I'm going to spend my time on this. I'm going to really clearly and carefully explain what I mean, and where I'm coming from. And I hope that'll kind of dispel some of the kind of questions, concerns, and hopefully lead to a more productive conversation. Though I think when it comes down to it, some people are so entrenched in their side that they really don't want to look at it from another perspective. It's either you're with us or against us, and that just comes with the territory when there's been a conflict going on this long. So I initially came to this issue kind of with my default mindset, which is, usually in any conflict, the sides don't understand each other, right? Walk a mile in this person's shoes, walk a mile in that person's shoes, and you guys are going to be able to come to some resolution. Looking at the issue, listening to the conversations over the past more than year of the Gaza conflict that's been going on, it became obvious to me that that wasn't the right approach. And for me to even accuse one side or the other wouldn't change things. And what I realized, that the real problem is us. I mean Americans. And I want to get into that. I really want to get into that. I don't want to, I'm not laying blame on Palestinians. I'm not laying blame on Israelis. I'm really saying that if we Americans want to see a resolution to this crisis, to this 70, 80 year long conflict, we actually have the power to change it. I want to start by talking about how this is very personal for me. This conflict, what's been going on, it's very personal. And that's a weird thing for me to say. Like, I don't know if anybody knows me. Okay, I'm born and raised in America. My family is, predominantly Circassian. What are you talking about? This is personal to me. Who am I? I think it's more personal to Israelis and Palestinians, right? And it's true. I'm not taking away from them. I'm just sharing that this issue really hits a special part of my soul. And to understand that, you have to understand my family background. There was a 100-year war in which Russia was fighting to basically conquer and take over the North Caucasus Mountains, which is where my ancestors came from. By the end, the Russian government had become very impatient, and so they really did launch this horrendous, really nothing less than genocidal campaign, burning down villages and killing all sorts of innocents in the process. And at the end, when they finally surrendered in 1864, the majority of people, like whoever wasn't killed, was basically sent out. There's this massive diaspora created in the mid 1800s, and there are estimates that like 3.5 million people were either killed or forced from their homeland. And those people who fled into the Ottoman Empire for safety, they found about half the people who left survived. Only half. The rest perished along the route. Starvation, disease, and even those who settled in the Middle East and Eastern Europe at the end of this war struggled to find a living. Some of them were displaced again, especially the ones in Eastern Europe. So that's 90% of the people expelled. The few that were left, the 80,000 to 150,000 people that were left, they were now under Russian control. And my grandfather was one of those people who was there and then forced to fight for Russia during World War II. On my father's side, they settled in the Golan Heights of Syria. And as some of you may know, in 1967, Israel invaded and occupied the Golan Heights. And they basically kicked out the people who were living there. And that included all those Circassian villages, and after maybe one couple generations, and now they had to start all over again. So as you can imagine, my father didn't have much love for the state of Israel. He saw the atrocities committed, he saw the suffering caused, and again, my own family having been displaced and having to start over again after so long. So you can imagine my surprise when he said something positive about Israel and the Jews. And he said when he was younger, he actually felt this happiness, this joy to see the Jews find their way home again, because it gave him hope that the Circassians would one day be able to find their way home, to find a place where they would be masters of their own fate, where they wouldn't be subject to the whims of the lands that they lived in. And just like what happened to them in the Golan Heights, right? A war that we had nothing to do with, just we were in the middle, and suffered as a result. So, there's so many layers to this, but the fact that he saw in the Jews himself in his own plight, like the plight of our people. That's why this is a very personal thing. And we also see ourselves in the Palestinians. Because the Jews found their way home, now the Palestinians were left without a home. And it hurts. It hurts a lot. It hurts to see this, because we know the trauma, the generational trauma that results from these kinds of acts, that results from just being, like I said, subject to the whims and the politics of the lands you live in. Jews understand that only too well. What they suffered in Europe during World War II and before it, and it's really inexcusable. And I can't blame them for wanting to find a homeland. I can't blame them for wanting to try to take their fate into their own hands. I can't blame them. But on the other hand, to displace another group of people and cause that trauma, be the reason for that trauma being inflicted on another group of people, causing that same kind of trauma, that same kind of diaspora, that same kind of suffering, this zero-sum game, it's either us or you. I think we can do better for the Palestinians and the Jews in Israel. I really, truly do I want the best for all of them. I want to see an end to this. I want to see an end to the suffering. That's where I'm coming from. Often because I'm Muslim, or because my father's born in the Golan Heights, there's this assumption that, well, you're a Muslim, you're taking the Palestinian side. That's not the case. It's hard for me to explain, but that's why I really want to go into the background, go into the history of my family, and kind of these more intimate conversations and insights that we have within our community, within our family, because I think all of us are subject to biases, but in this situation, my bias is towards the cessation of suffering for everyone. That's my bias. That's my sincere desire. That's where I'm coming from. And if that's a bias you don't agree with, that's fine. But that is my bias. So unfortunately, this nuance is not something that's very common in these discussions. The conversation goes something like this: either you're with us or against us. Either you recognize our legitimate claim to this land and you support us against the other side, or you're prejudiced, you're ignorant, you're racist, you're whatever accusation that gets leveled at you, right? But that's pretty much the conversation, and right now other people are piling in. It's like, oh yeah, you guys are this for not supporting Israel. Oh, you guys are that for not supporting the Palestinians. Oh, you guys. It's not productive. It's not productive. All it does is it brings in more people into this conflict, divides the rest of us, so that now we're all stuck in this limbo. We're all dragged into the status quo, which is a stalemate and suffering and pain and trauma. And this is not an acceptable outcome. This is not acceptable. This is not bringing us closer to a resolution. This does not bring us closer to ending the suffering of all parties involved. We're stuck with this status quo, with this deadlocked, you know, occupation, with the Palestinian population that, wants to assert their right to live there, and an Israeli society that wants them gone. And inevitably, you're going to come across people who will know details about this conflict that you don't know. And they'll use that against you. Like, well, you don't know about this, and you don't know about that. Yeah, we had to do this because that side did that. And we had to, and both sides will say the same exact stuff, right? They will rationalize why they do what they do. They'll rationalize why they don't have a choice and they have to do this or that, and how you're ignorant and the only possible solution is to support them. And I have to say I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. I'm not sick of it because, I'm delegitimizing one side or both sides, but because real people are really suffering. Real people are really dying. Real lives are being affected. And, I think we forget how not just those people there are affected. In America, we are affected also. We forget about 9/11. What was the motivation behind those hijackers? Even bin Laden himself said, we are retaliating against Western support for dictators and also Western support for Israel that oppresses the Palestinian people. And so we got dragged into the war in Afghanistan. We got dragged into a war in Iraq because of this issue. And I don't know how many trillions of dollars were spent, how many, thousands, if not tens of thousands of American soldiers' lives were lost. And then, it's not just the lives lost there on the battlefield, but all the people coming back from war, traumatized, committing suicide, and the suffering that their families go through, let alone the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives that were lost in Iraq, the societies that have to be rebuilt, the political turmoil in the meantime. So much suffering has been caused as a result of this conflict. And to believe that this conflict is localized just there is naive. It's affecting all of us. We are all suffering. That's why I believe the goal isn't taking a side in this conflict. The goal is ending it. And that's the question. How do we promote peace? How do we create stability? How do we find a solution that will allow the world to live in peace, allow us to move forward from this conflict? And I do believe not just me, I've heard others mention this, but I do believe there's a solution out there. There's a model out there. This feeling of a never-ending war was very present with us in the 90s as we watched Yugoslavia disintegrate and the Bosnians, Croats, and the Serbs fight amongst themselves. Unfortunately, the Serbs inherited the majority of the weapons following the breakup of this country, and that left the Bosnians and the Croats without much in the way of military resources. But they still fought. They fought on. They fought for their survival. I think in some circles in Europe, they were hoping that the Serbs would be able to conquer those other two groups and reconstitute Yugoslavia. I suspect, because what they did is they implemented a flat out, ban on military sales to anyone in the region. But when all of the military might was held by the Serbs, essentially you're empowering that one group over the other two, right? But the Europeans rationalized this, saying that we don't want the war to spread. That's why there's a military embargo on all of these countries. And there were attempts at peace talks, but if you're the one group who has all the weapons, are you going to come to the peace table? And so the Serbs just kept attacking, kept chipping away at the Bosnians and the Croats. Then rumors came out that there was some ethnic cleansing going on, that Bosnian civilians were being rounded up, killed, and rumors kept spreading, evidence was presented, and soon what happened is there was this reaction. Other Muslim countries were really angry at Europe for basically allowing this to happen, for innocent civilians to be slaughtered. And so certain Muslim countries, like, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Saudi Arabia, Turkey, I think even Malaysia, they started selling weapons to the Bosnians so that they could defend themselves. This worried Europe. Europeans started wondering, okay, we're saying we're doing this blanket, arms embargo on Yugoslavia because we don't want the war to spread, and here we have other countries getting involved. So very quickly, very soon after, the Europeans actually started planning. Okay, we need to end this war. We need to stop it before things get out of hand. And so what they did a few things. One is they instituted they stopped the arms embargo, right? They allowed the sales of weapons to the Croats and the Bosnians. The other thing they did is they started bombing the Serb positions to reduce their advantage, the advantage that they had. What this did is it created more of an equilibrium. So now the Serbs were weaker, the Bosnians and the Croats were stronger, and now everybody was motivated to come to the negotiating table. And essentially that's what happened, right? I mean, there were a lot of details in there, but essentially those are the broad strokes of what happened. I see a lot of parallels with the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis. The Israelis definitely have military superiority. They control everything within their own territory and within the occupied territories. They have a navy, they have an air force, and some even say they have nuclear weapons, right? So let's be honest, that versus a civilian population with some fighters that are militant who might have some guns, right? Some bombs, some rockets, etc. This is definitely a similar situation to Bosnia, where the Serbs had the vast majority of the weapons and the Croats and Bosnians were really fighting with the scraps that were left over. Israel also has the U.S. to veto all these UN resolutions that are passed. And so as a result, Israel has very little reason to come to the negotiating table, just like the Serbs. Why would I, negotiate when I can just keep doing what I'm doing? Slowly intimidate the Palestinians to leave these lands. And every so often they fight, and then now we have an excuse to go in and take more territory. And that's what's been happening. They claim more and more territory. That upsets the Palestinians more and more. Eventually, one Palestinian does something, or a group of Palestinians does something, and that ends up being this pretext for occupying more land, taking more land, killing more people. And this process has continued. It didn't start with Gaza. This has been going on for 70, 80 years. The good news is the United States, the West, doesn't have to go in and bomb Israel or sell weapons to the Palestinians. I really do believe a significant shift in our policy could dramatically change the political landscape and lead to real, sincere negotiations. The United States offers billions of dollars a year in aid and military aid. We offer political support, not just at home, but in the UN. So if we hold that back, what that does is it opens up Israel to the consequences of its actions. The UN would now have authority to take action, to sanction, to boycott the state, which would dramatically affect them. It would also give forces within Israel, more moderate voices, a stronger position, some leverage to show that negotiation is the way out of this conflict, not further escalations in violence. And that's why I say we, the United States, are the problem, right? Israel is acting in its own interest as it believes it to be, right? They want to be masters of their own fate. And like I said, I cannot blame them. I cannot fault them for wanting this. Circassians, we understand the suffering that happens when you don't have your own country, when you don't have your own homeland, when you don't have a place where you have control over your own destiny. Same with the Palestinians. I can't fault them for fighting for their freedom, for fighting for their families, for fighting for their very survival. It reminds me of the Circassians' battles with Russia. Overwhelming forces, almost imminent destruction faces you. And what do? For us, we fled and we restarted. And honestly, I can't say that was the best decision either, because there's a lot of suffering that came out of that diaspora too. So, I can't blame the Palestinians for sticking around and fighting for their rights. A significant percentage of the population did flee. They went to Jordan, they went to Syria, they went around the world and formed new communities. And still, they're often treated as second-class citizens, as still not belonging to those societies that they went to. So, I can't blame the Israelis. I can't blame the Palestinians. Each is really caught in this zero-sum game and fighting for what they believe is their very survival. And in many ways, it's true. So we, as Americans, existing outside of this conflict, are really the only ones who have the power. And this has been voiced by Israelis. They've actually been begging us. It's like, America, you have to stop Netanyahu. You have to stop this. You have to stop us. Because inevitably there will be repercussions for Israel. And in the short term right now, the first people that the Israeli government has to brainwash is its own. They have to dehumanize the Palestinians. They have to demonize them to justify the horrific treatment that Israeli society basically dishes out to these people. The oppression is insane. The dehumanization is insane. And those Jews, those Israelis that are concerned for the soul of their people, worry about how this conflict is, like I said, robbing them of their humanity, robbing not just the individuals who participate, but the society as a whole. And there's a backlash. I'm hearing it even in this country. There are many people angry at Jews, all Jews, because of the actions of the Israeli government, who is basically saying we are the voice of the Jewish people, pitting Americans against other Americans. Why? Because they're Jewish, without really understanding whether they support Netanyahu or not, whether they support occupation or not. There's a real danger to all Jews around the world in this conflict. If we, Americans, truly decide that this is enough, that we really do want to see an end to it, then we should be really happy to know that we have that power and that there is a model for this, that what happened in Bosnia in the 90s, the ethnic cleansing, the accusations and the reality of the ethnic cleansing that was happening, the oppression by the Serbs, you know, there was a way out, and that was to balance the power between the sides to basically force all parties to come to the negotiating table. This is a very powerful thing. It's a very, and like I said, it's so beautiful that I truly and honestly believe that it can be done without force, without, in the Bosnian conflict, Europe and I think believe America also participated in bombing campaigns against the Serb positions. We don't have to kill anybody. We don't have to get involved militarily. All we have to say to Israel is, the Israeli government is, look, you have lost our support. But if you can negotiate a true and sincere peace with the Palestinians, providing space for them within your own society or a separate society, you guys have to figure this out. But a long, true, sincere peace, if that can be negotiated, well, then you'll have our support again. But without it, we're not going to continue this. It's too it's a problem not just for Palestinians and Israelis. It's a problem for us in the West, right? Us in America particularly. We've already gotten dragged into two wars. And there's too many lives who have been lost because we have been unwilling to find a way out. And there is a model. There is a way out for everyone. I hope this is food for thought. I hope it opens up another avenue for discussion. I don't believe the only two ways are either you support Israel without question or you support the Palestinians without question. I think there is another way. I would even describe this as the American way. Our interests, our values of human dignity and equality, human rights. I think this is a very American approach. I think it's consistent with our values, but it's also consistent with our strategic interests. This conflict has led to too much suffering. It's dragged us into conflicts that we shouldn't have been involved in the first place. And I think putting an end to it really makes the world a safer place for everyone, for the Jews of the world, for the Palestinians of the world, and for the Americans and Europeans and everybody else who's been caught in the middle of this conflict. So I hope something here makes sense. I'm sure I'm going to get comments about I'm biased and prejudiced and I don't know this and I don't know that. But, I don't know everything. I'm not an expert and I'm not claiming to be. But I think, looking at this from from a new, fresh perspective might help us find a way out. And instead of taking sides, I think finding a shared goal, the shared goal of peace, a long-lasting peace, is what we need. And in order to do that, we need to create a more level playing field between the two parties. So I hope that helps. Thank you very much for listening. Please share your comments. Looking forward to seeing them. All right, thanks. Goodbye.